I know what you're probably thinking at this point. In all of this, don't we somehow lose our humanity? I get that. I mean, I understand why that's a concern. It's like, I want to go on record saying when I watch a Terminator movie, I'm rooting for the people to win, not the machines. I don't want some weird, dehumanized future, you know, where our humanity is somehow lessened. But I don't think that's anything like what's going to happen. And if I can tell you a couple of stories from history, when technology changes came about that actually altered how we think, that this has happened in the past, and that in retrospect, if we look back at it, we're very grateful for it. But if you had asked the people at the time, I think they would have been very unsettled. And this problem of ignorance, has an enormously large cost on human history. And I think one example of this will illustrate the point. This is Franz Ferdinand. He was Archduke of the Austrian-Hungary Empire. He was born in the 19th century, but he was assassinated in 1914 by this 19-year-old young man named Gabriele Princip. Gabriele was able to pull off the assassination because this man, circled in red, Leopold Loika, the driver, took a wrong turn. He made an error. He had bad information as to the route. This event led directly to World War I, immediately. And World War I, the devastation that it brought about to the whole world, led to the Great Depression, widespread misery. This created an environment that a young lieutenant from World War I, Adolf Hitler, was able to rise, and the Nazi Party and Germany were able to bring about World War II, where millions of more people died. This led to the invention of the atomic bomb, which directly caused the Cold War, which consumed vast amounts of resources. When you add all of this up, it was a grand total of 100 million people were killed, and all of this came from a bad piece of information. If you think about it, GPS would have solved this problem. A Garmin would have saved 100 million lives in this case. And I'd like to switch gears at this point and actually now start talking about the future. There is an entire cottage industry of people known as futurists. And they're the people that give you the proverbial backpack, you know, jetpacks and flying cars and that sort of thing. And the interesting thing about futurists is not a single one of them saw the internet coming. And I'm not talking about in the 1920s, nobody saw the internet coming, but in the 1980s, nobody wrote about the benefits of connecting millions of computers around the world so people could share information. It just didn't dawn on anybody. Now, it's tempting at some point to look back and say, well, you know, a little smugly and say, if I had been a futurist before the internet came along, I totally would have seen it coming. But I actually don't think this is the case. Because up until very recently, I don't think people actually, we even had a clue what it really is. When a new technology comes out, like the internet, the only way people can understand it is in light of the prior technology, what it's kind of replacing. And that's how come that when TV came out, and people said, hey, what's TV? What they said is, oh, it's radio, but with pictures. And so they were locked in that way of thinking, it's radio with pictures, and that's why the very first television shows, the very first television broadcasts, were generally men in suits and ties, standing behind microphones, reading the news, and yet we just filmed it. And so it was still radio with pictures in their mind. And it took years and years and years before you could actually do something with the medium that escapes that kind of defines it as its own thing. And then you get things like Battlestar Galactica or Lost, or things you just couldn't have ever done with radio. And I think that's really what has happened with the internet. When the internet first came out, we could only view it in light of the prior technology. A lot of times, the important thing is figuring out what exactly to look at, or what question to ask. And if you get this wrong, you come to wrong conclusions. This is an early fax machine, one of the very first. It was developed by an American company that did a lot of market research to decide whether there would be a market for this device. And they ask a very interesting question. They ask, would you pay $1,000 for a device that attaches to your telephone and lets you send the same document that you can mail for 12 cents? Well, the answer to this question is a resounding no. And what they should have done instead of asking this question is said, is there a market for what this thing does? And had you done this, you would have noticed the rapid ascension of companies like Federal Express and UPS that clearly tried to tackle the same underlying problem that the fax machine was solving. And that's why I would like to talk about the first internet search engine. It isn't InfoSeek or maybe a name you've read recently. It actually dates back to 500 BC, to an area of the world, ancient Greece, to a little city called Delphi, to this woman, the Oracle at Delphi. Now, as far as search engines go, the Oracle had three large problems. The first was what you might call an uptime problem. The oracle was only available about 3 months out of the year. So about 9 months out of the year, you had nothing you could do. The second one is you generally had to undergo some form of an epic quest to gain access to the oracle. And finally, the oracle's answers were, shall we say, a bit cryptic and needing interpretation. For instance, as you might ask a modern-day search engine, how do I treat a burn? The oracle may respond, to treat a burn, you must first learn to think like fire. All of this actually caused a rather tragic outcome for King Croesus, because he went to the oracle at Delphi and he asked her, should I wage war against the Persians? And the oracle at Delphi said, if you cross the river Halys, a great empire will fall. Well, like most people, King Croesus heard exactly what he wanted to hear. He crossed the river, engaged the Persians, only to realize that the oracle was talking about his great empire, and he was defeated. Interestingly, we still have oracles with us today, or we still aspire to them. And when you think about something like Star Trek, they put an oracle on board the Enterprise. They had this computer that you could ask these questions to and get these answers. And you would say, computer, what's the closest planet with dilithium crystals? And the computer would say CD Alpha 6 or whatever. And so that this idea, this like quest for perfect and immediate knowledge is an old one, but one that we're finally coming to learn how to fill.